What is going on, my good people? So welcome to today's video, and today's a pretty deep one. We're talking about The Exorcist, the movie. Y'all remember that? I know I do. A lot of you may have watched this movie, The Exorcist, that came out in 1973, originally from the books by a guy called William Peter Blatty. If you haven't watched The Exorcist, I wouldn't recommend it, but if you want to, just to get into the information in this video, there's going to be spoilers, but that's the movie. This movie that came out in 1973, I'm under the impression that it was a psychological operation, and we're just going to go through a bit of information regarding that. And what is a psyop, right? Ultimately, we're going to come to an end conclusion about why this happened, what this means for us, and how we can use this information to better ourselves, really. I think that's the end result in anything, you know, right? So, a psychological operation, according to Wikipedia, are operations to convey selected information and indicators to audiences to influence their emotions, motives, and objective reasoning, and ultimately the behaviour of governments, organisations, groups, and individuals. Psychological operations were a kind of new development in warfare, psychological warfare. And if you go back to a man called Michael Aquino, he was the general of the army, and he ended up moving towards, in 1967 or something, to the Psychological Warfare Operations Division, or the Psychological Operations Division in the US military, and he really established and brought forth the ideas of psychological warfare. And he proposed that the future of warfare isn't going to be with guns and bombs and nuclear war, whatever. It's going to be psychological. It's going to be on the mental planes. And he sought ways to introduce military tactics to destabilize other nations, organizations, by disrupting and almost subverting the belief systems, the opinions, the morals, and the thoughts of the opponents, country or peoples, so that in essence they will self-destruct themselves. You don't really have to bomb them, you don't have to kill them. Psychological warfare will self-destruct the nation itself. And there are a lot of he came up with a document called Mind Wars, and if you read Mind Wars, it's a very important document that goes into all the details and how things like conspiracy theories, right, will be used to subvert the opinions and beliefs of the public. It goes into a lot of different things as well, and it's important to know this because it all relates, and I'm going to tie it all together. So back to the movie, The Exorcist, a supernatural horror film that completely shifted the paradigm of movie making, especially the horror industry. And there is a great documentary to watch. Let me just pull it up here. That goes into the impacts of this movie that came out in 1973. I remember my father telling me when he watched it how crazy it was, and the experiences people have when they went to the movies and the cinemas to watch the movie. Anyway, this documentary is called The Exorcist, The Cultural Impact, a 1974 documentary. And it talks about not only how The Exorcist became the #1 best-selling movie within the first 2 days. It tore apart all results prior to that, and I think now it grosses like 441 million on, you know, as a blockbuster movie on release, which is just incredible at that time. But the documentary goes into the cultural impacts this movie had, and if you're like me and you watched it, some of that movie, the images and the details, the scenes really stuck with me. They really influenced my thinking about what demonic possession is and what horror really is. And it appealed to some kind of shadow traumatic experiences in my life and brought them forward. And I'm sure a lot of you have. I mean, I posted some things on Instagram, and a lot of people were messaging me saying when they watched this movie, certain things happened. They couldn't sleep for weeks on end. They still have, you know, images of what this girl in the movie looked like when she was possessed, and some of the scenes keep flashing up. And so it's clear that this was more than a movie. This was something deeper. This really affected the subconscious, deeper, awareness of the people and the audience. And, we're not going to go into exactly what Hollywood is, but we're going to touch on some of those things that we know about Hollywood and the influence that Hollywood has on culture, on people's thoughts and perceptions. And so this movie came out and people were lining up. There was literally thousands of people lining up to the movies. The lines would go so far. And there's lots of cases of people watching the movie, leaving the cinemas, crying, not wanting to return to the cinemas. There are actually incidences of heart attacks. There was incidents that the movies caused miscarriages, traumatic episodes, panic attacks, all kinds of different things this movie was able to induce into people. And I think a lot of us forget that it's a movie. It's not real. And it's causing these things in people. And this is playing on the subconscious aspect of the reality. And I always had an idea. I always had a thought that when I watched this movie ages ago when I was younger, that there was more to it. It's playing on people. There's a reason why Hollywood grossed this movie, why it was so impactful. There is a deeper aspect. It wasn't just a coincidence that this movie caused such a rift in culture. And then I came to realize, William Blatty, the author of the books and obviously the movie, I came to find out that William Blatty, here, let me just pull this up. He worked in 1954 for the US Army Psychological Warfare Division. And that completely confirmed every intuition, every thought that I had. Because this man, before he made the movies, served as a United States Psychological Warfare Division expert. He actually became the first lieutenant of the division. What are you learning when you are in the Psychological Warfare Division? You're learning all about the mind. You're learning all about the psyche, the subconscious mind, how information can subvert your values, your belief systems, the way you see the world. So if a man that came from a background of psychological warfare, how do you actually dismantle a person by simply portraying information, whether that's propaganda, false information, things like terror, trauma, all of these different things? How do you relay that onto a person and dismantle them and get them to behave in a certain way that you desire? That's what psychological warfare is. That's what psyops are. And so when you look at the cultural impacts of The Exorcist and you understand that the writer of the books came from a psychological warfare division's background, it all starts to click. This movie was meant for something much deeper, and I believe it was a psychological operation, and it was kind of like a human behavioral experiment. The players, the Hollywood, the people involved, the scientists, authors, the ruling class were able to gather so much information about how movies can impact people's thoughts, belief systems, the culture, society in general. And so I was doing a little bit of digging, and Wikipedia kind of like says a lot of stuff regarding this, which is kind of interesting. It goes into how, the cultural impacts and on release date, what happened, how it triggered people into miscarriages, into traumatic episodes. And it comes into this is a very important thing here in Wikipedia. Heart attacks and miscarriages were reported. A psychiatric journal published a paper on cinematic neurosis triggered by the film. So here we have the film being released. We're seeing the reaction of the public. And now scientists are starting to study this. They're starting to gather information and data regarding how this film impacted people. And so they're naming this kind of study cinematic neurosis, right? And so I'm looking and they've written kind of like articles and papers, and I have like the paper with me talking about cinematic neurosis, and it's a long paper, a long article to read, and it goes into how cinemas now are actually, and the movie industry can actually cause and develop anxiety, somatic responses, disassociation, so basically the splitting of the mind where you no longer know who you are, and even psychotic symptoms whilst watching movies. And the article or the paper, kind of talks about the four, what do they call it now? There's 4 different episodes of trauma, 4 different stages, and 4 different symptoms. This is what it talks about. The first symptom, they say, is, let me just pull this up here. The first symptom is hyperarousal. Hyperarousal is being in a consistent state of alert and danger, and this can cause the afflicted to be uncommonly jumpy and easily startled. Hyperarousal can lead to insomnia and other, sleep problems as well. And so what they're basically saying is, when a person is faced with trauma, whether that's from a movie or not, because we're going to get into that in a little bit of time, but the movie acts as a scare. It plays on people's own real life experiences, and it brings them into fruition, and it makes them deal with it with the conscious mind there and then, which is why people go into episodes. So it's talking about the 4 symptoms of being induced by this trauma related content and information. The first symptom is hyperarousal. This is where, you watch a movie and then you can't sleep that night. You can't sleep the week after. You're always looking around because you're in this hyperarousal state. That's the first symptom of trauma, right? And a lot of us get this through movies, right? A lot of people who watch things like Game of Thrones, and they're in this state after watching it of just like, their behavior is changed to match what the information was portraying, which is like violence and aggression, and so people who watch Game of Thrones, if you notice, they're like, they're always feeling like this kind of empowerment of just being masculine or violence or whatever. You see it in a lot of movies. And it goes on to the second symptom, which is intrusion. This is the most common symptom since it includes many symptoms. Intrusion means that the traumatic event will intrude upon your mind. This can cause flashbacks while awake, nightmares when asleep. So it's common when people watch horror movies that they get nightmares after. Or if you watch a movie, you get a nightmare or a dream of that same movie that you just watched the night before. That's a common thing. That is a traumatic response, and it's one of the symptoms. Goes on to the third traumatic response, and this traumatic neurosis is called constriction, and this is the most alarming symptom to those around the afflicted, as it puts afflicted into a trance-like state. The sufferer becomes dissociated with reality, and basically it goes on to say that constriction is where you constrict yourself to a safe space. When you're traumatized, you'll often find that you won't want to leave or enter any other boundaries apart from the place that makes you feel safe. So a lot of people will lock themselves in their rooms because it's the only place where they feel some sense of reality. Everything out of that is trauma. It's too hard for them to deal with. And so that's, one of the things. When you're scared, you do that. Movies can do this to people, and the article goes on to talk about how there is actually cases of this happening from people watching the Exorcist movie, which is just mind-blowing. The fourth and final symptom is disconnection. The afflicted has a sense of loss of self. They are no longer trusting of others, and often leads to paranoia. They no longer feel safe no matter where they are. And this is relating it to the movie. So eventually these symptoms can lead to the loss of self. When that trauma becomes so apparent within you, you no longer know who you are. You're consumed by the past. You're consumed by past experiences. You're consumed by the fear of the information that you've received. And so as I'm speaking about this, you have to understand that the scientists are writing about how this movie did all of these things and what they analyzed from the people who watched the movies. So they're writing this report based on that. And so what I'm saying is what was observed when people watched the Exorcist movie. Can you see now why this is a psychological operation? They understood how movies impact behavior. And so we're wondering why we're living in a world right now where people are so programmed and are always appealing to authority and always obeying to authority and always behaving in a certain way, in a desired way that the cabal or the ruling class want them to be. So when we take all of these symptoms and we apply that to today's world, what if we're talking about movies such as World War Z, such as all of these zombie movies, The Contagion, these virus movies, right? If we understand that the fourth and final symptom is disconnection, and the afflicted has a sense of loss of self and they are no longer trusting of others, and often leads to paranoia. Well, in the last 2 years, did we not see the whole world go into hysteria and paranoia over something that wasn't even real? Right? And we start to connect the dots and we're like, this movie just broke a paradigm. This movie really broke a paradigm. And the more you research it, the more it just kind of becomes more and more apparent. And it also gets into a lot of other dark things because, if we look at what actually happened when they were filming this movie, is a lot of people say the movie was cursed. And we've come to understand a lot about Hollywood and how the origins of Hollywood and how a lot of rituals are done on set because they can curse you through movies. They can manipulate your thoughts and perceptions through the frequencies given off in movies. And so in The Exorcist, there was lots of strange circumstances of like how the movie was delayed. It was supposed to come out in half the amount of time, but it took double the amount of time because, for example, one of the things happened where the set was on fire. The set caught on fire, and one of the most strangest parts about that was the girl's room, where she is possessed in the movie, was untouched. You think of that what you will. But then we also have, during the production of the movie, a lot of the family members of the actors and the cast passed away and, died in very bizarre circumstances. Very shortly after the movie was released, within a few years, many of the casts actually died, some of them being poisoned. There are conspiracies and thoughts. Very, very dark things. We also know in the movie they put subliminal programming and messages, although I was reading something that William Blatty doesn't believe they were subliminal because you could see them. But if you watch the movie, there are flashing images of certain devilish pagan characters, and it's all there to induce this trance-like, scared, hypnotic, traumatic experience. And I was reading the document, and the document talks about how when people go through traumatic experiences in life and they watch these movies, especially The Exorcist, it appeals to that trauma that's deeply buried in the subconscious. And when one is appealed to that, it brings that into the conscious mind, and they're having to deal with that information, and that's what causes all of these things like heart attacks and miscarriages. The biology is then rewired. So it's really, really interesting, and the connection and the confirmation is the fact that William Blatty actually worked in 1954 with the Psychological Warfare Division's operation in the US Army, and it all just ties together. Now, moving on to the subconscious mind, which is like the final part that I want to get into, and then we're just going to wrap this up. Well, the subconscious mind doesn't actually know the difference between reality and what's fake, whether it's reality or a movie. It can't make that dissociation. That's the conscious mind's job, because the conscious mind uses the frontal lobe, it uses logic, critical thought. You can discern things with the conscious mind, but the subconscious has no filter. And we know this by movies. When you are feeling sad from a movie, or if you remember a time of feeling really sad or crying from a movie or being extremely scared, you know that the movie, and the conscious mind knows that the movie isn't real, yet your emotions are raised. Why is that? Well, that's because the subconscious doesn't know the difference. And so because the subconscious mind doesn't know the difference, what we're seeing now is movies infiltrating the minds of people. If you don't have a strong mind, if you're not cautious, if you're not protecting yourselves in different ways, if you're not aware of this whole process, it will affect you. And so now we're seeing movies full of subliminal programmings. We're seeing movies that are playing with your emotions. And as we know, the subconscious drives behavior. Most of your choices that you've made in life are driven by the subconscious mind, because it drives your emotions. It's what makes you choose what's right or wrong, whether you go left or right. Your morals, your belief systems, it all originates in the subconscious, and the subconscious mind picks up millions and millions of bits of information per second. Things that you don't even see. Things that are just happening that you're consciously not aware of, it picks it up and it stores that as information, and it will act on the information. That's what the subconscious mind is designed to do. And so these psychologists know this, and I think The Exorcist broke that paradigm and allowed psychologists to further develop this. And as we know, Hollywood hires psychologists to put all of these tactics in movies. And so there you have it. You have this unfiltered subconscious mind downloading information from these movies, not knowing that it's fake, but its primary goal is to act out on the information it receives. And so now we're living in a society, in a world where it's in hysteria, where a lot of people are just obeying authority. A lot of people are scared, frantic. We have, record-breaking cases of chronic illness and mental disorders and all of these different things. And it's not a coincidence. Addictions, all stems from, a lot of it stems from subconscious mind being programmed. And so what I want to say with this is, first of all, don't watch The Exorcist. And secondly is, we've got to be aware, we've got to empower ourselves with the right kind of environment. And so awareness is key, and start studying how the subconscious mind works, because I feel like that's where you bridge the gap, where you can comfortably watch and expose yourself to information in the process of learning and enjoyment without having to be pulled and manipulated by the information. That's all what psychological warfare is. So if you can step out of that realm of warfare, which is what this is, whether we're talking about Hollywood and watching the latest DC movie, it's all related to psychological warfare, manipulation of the mind. If you can put yourself in a position where you're stepped out of that, that's a state of empowerment, and you can see the world way more clearly. You're not reactive. You're not programmed to behave in a specific way or in a desired way of what the ruling class want you to be. And so you can step out and be your true and authentic self. And so that's the message of today's video. I hope you have enjoyed, and please this is going to be on YouTube. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. I want to make more videos like this in the future, because I feel like it's better than the short videos on Instagram and things like that. Subscribe, share the video, share me your thoughts as well, and I'll see you on the next video. Much love.